When police kicked in her door, she was folding laundry, still in her scrubs, her hair pulled back, gospel music humming low from the kitchen radio. 20 minutes later, she was in handcuffs, accused of murdering her husband. The evidence? A body in the trunk of a burned-out Camry, shot execution style. The blanket he was wrapped in? From her guest room. The duct tape? Her fingerprints. And the murder weapon? Registered in her name. But the part that shattered her soul wasn't the cold cell or the trial. It was watching the evening news from behind bars and seeing her dead, husband alive, grinning on a beach in St. Lucia, slipping a diamond ring onto the finger of a teenage girl he once claimed he was mentoring at their church. How does a woman go from loving wife and respected nurse to being painted as a cold-blooded killer overnight? What happens when the man you trust with your life is the one who sets you up to take the fall? This is the true story of lies, betrayal, and a plot so twisted it could only end in prison, paradise, or both. But before we unravel this insane web of fake deaths and sick manipulation, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Trust me, this one? You're not gonna believe how deep it goes. Shanice Braylon Wooten was no stranger to hardship. Born and raised in the unforgiving housing projects of Montgomery Park, Mississippi, she clawed her way out of poverty with nothing but grit, determination, and a mother who always said, "Don't let the devil catch you sleeping, baby." By 28, Shanice was a registered nurse, respected on the floor, known for her calm under pressure and her ability to comfort the dying with a soft touch and a steady voice. She was the first in her family to own a home, drive a car with leather seats, and carry a key card to get into work. She met Jaquavian Quay Strickland when she was just 22. It was at a midnight church revival in a tent behind a rundown Piggly Wiggly on the edge of town, the kind of place where sweat and hallelujahs hung thick in the air. Quay was 29 back then, a charismatic youth pastor with dreamy eyes, a smooth baritone, and a tongue slicker than oil. He wore a crooked smile and knew every scripture that made a lonely woman feel seen. When he pulled her up for prayer, he held her hand longer than he should have. She said she felt the Holy Spirit. Her best friend said it looked like lust. For years later, they were married. Shanice was 26, living in the suburbs of Stonefield, Alabama, with a new last name, a second-hand SUV, and dreams of starting a family. She thought she had finally escaped the chaos of her childhood, the sound of sirens, the fear of eviction. She'd build a quiet life, a clean life. Or so she thought, because behind closed doors, things weren't what they seemed. Quay, once the picture of patience and compassion, had grown bitter. He resented Shanice's independence, emasculated by her $90,000 salary, her spotless credit score. While she was putting in 12-hour shifts at the hospital, saving lives and paying bills, he was spiraling, financially unstable, chronically unemployed, and full of excuses. His side projects failed. His ministry stalled. And every time Shanice succeeded, he got smaller. He told her she was trying to be the man of the house. He'd say, "A woman don't need to be making more than her husband. That's why the Lord made Adam first." The jealousy crept in like black mold, slow, poisonous, and hard to see until everything starts to rot. He started accusing her of cheating. First, it was little things. Side-eye glances if she wore lip gloss to work. Comments like, "You ain't never dressed like that for church." Then it escalated. He began checking her phone while she showered, sniffing her scrubs when she got home, calling her job pretending to be a patient just to verify she was really there. Once, he showed up to the hospital parking lot at midnight just to see who was walking her to her car. Shanice tried to pray it away. She tried couples counseling with a pastor who spent more time talking about submission than healing. She even blamed herself. Thought maybe she was working too much. Maybe she was being distant. But the truth? She was exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally, carrying the weight of a man who hated her shine. On Sundays, they were the picture of devotion, front row at Greater New Galilee Baptist Church, hands raised in worship, Quay's arm wrapped tightly around her shoulder. But inside their home, trust had turned to surveillance, and love had morphed into possession. There were no bruises, not yet. But there was tension. Walking on eggshells kind of tension. That creeping fear that one wrong move could tip the whole thing over. And yet, Shanice stayed. Because when you grow up with nothing, you hold on tight to anything that feels like stability. Even if it's a man who's quietly poisoning your peace. She didn't know it then, but the man who once washed her feet with prayer oil was already planning her downfall. And the life she thought she built from scratch? He was about to burn it all to the ground. One evening in February 2021, Shanice Wooten came home to find Jaquavian Quay Strickland standing in the bedroom, zipping up a duffel bag. His Bible was on the nightstand. His cologne lingered in the air like it always did when he was about to disappear for days. She asked where he was going. He didn't look at her when he said it. A spiritual retreat. Tennessee. I need to clear my head. Shanice didn't argue. At that point, she was used to his vanishing acts, long fasting weekends, prayer sabbaticals, nights he claimed to be locked in the church but was unreachable for hours. Part of her was relieved. A weekend of silence sounded like peace. But a weekend turned into a week. Then two. No calls. No texts. His phone went straight to voicemail. His social media went dark. The church claimed they hadn't seen him. His mother said she hadn't heard from him since Christmas. Shanice filed a missing persons report, but the officer barely glanced at the paper before shrugging it off. Men leave. It happens. And then came the knock. Frantic. Repetitive. The kind of knock that says you're not being asked to open the door, you're being told. She opened it to a wall of uniforms. Guns drawn. A sweat boot kicked her coffee table over before she could blink. They slammed her to the floor, zip-tied her wrists, and told her she was under arrest for first-degree murder. She thought it was a mistake. A sick joke. She kept asking where Quay was. Was he hurt? Was he missing? But they didn't answer. According to detectives, Quay's body had been found in the trunk of a torched Toyota Camry off a dirt road in the backwoods of Bradford County, about an hour outside of Stonefield. The car had been burned almost to the frame. Inside was a charred corpse, too damaged for facial recognition, but the forensics team claimed it matched Quay's dental records. He had been shot twice in the back of the head. Execution style. Wrapped in a wool blanket that matched a set from Shanice's guest bedroom, asterisk the exact one her late aunt gave her for nursing school graduation. Asterisk her fingerprints were allegedly on the duct tape used to bind his ankles and mouth. The weapon? A .38 caliber revolver, legally registered to Shanice, reported missing 6 months prior but never followed up on. To make matters worse, surveillance footage surfaced from a neighbor's security camera. It showed Shanice dragging something heavy out of her house and placing it into her trunk the night before Quay supposedly left for Tennessee. The grainy video was time-stamped. It didn't show what was in the bundle, but it was enough. Enough for a warrant. Enough for an arrest. Enough for the media to slap a mugshot on the evening news and paint her as a jealous wife with blood on her hands. Shanice screamed her innocence. She begged for a lawyer. She pleaded to see the body, to identify it herself, but the detective just looked at her like she was playing dumb. They had their story already. Quay had confronted her about an alleged affair, one they couldn't prove, but claimed was common knowledge. He wanted a divorce. She couldn't handle it. So she snapped. The narrative was too neat. Too easy. No signs of struggle in the house. No blood. No witnesses. But the circumstantial evidence piled high, like someone had carefully arranged it piece by piece, just enough to bury her. And the worst part? She was assigned a public defender who seemed more interested in clearing his schedule than clearing her name. During the trial, he barely challenged the forensics. He didn't question the chain of custody on the video. He didn't push for an independent autopsy. The judge denied nearly every motion Shanice tried to file on her own. The jury? 9 white women, 2 white men, and 1 black juror who fell asleep during closing arguments. The trial lasted 5 days. No expert testimony. No hard motive. No blood evidence in her car. Just a manipulated video, a burned body they said was Quay, and a courtroom full of people who had already made up their minds. On the 5th day, the verdict came down. Guilty. The sentence, life without the possibility of parole. Shanice didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat frozen, jaw clenched, eyes locked straight ahead as if waiting for someone to say, "Just kidding." But no one did. She was 29, and her life, as she knew it, was over. Or so everyone thought. Because what no one in that courtroom knew was that the man she supposedly murdered was still very much alive. And he was about to resurface in the most disturbing way imaginable. The truth didn't come out until a full year after Shanice Wooten was locked away in a concrete cell with a broken clock and a stained cot. And even then, it didn't come gently. It clawed its way out, ugly, tangled, and almost too bizarre to believe. Because the man she was convicted of killing never died. In fact, Jaquavian Quay Strickland had carefully orchestrated his own murder from the very start, like a twisted puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. And he didn't do it alone. Enter Malaya Nix Carter, 19, barely legal, a foster kid from East Stonefield who looked like she still wore braces and smelled like dollar store perfume. But behind that baby face was a viper. Quay had known her for years. He mentored her through the church's youth outreach program, gave her rides home, helped her fill out college applications, praised her spirit during Bible study. No one blinked twice. He was a pastor. She was a foster teen. But what no one saw was the grooming, the late-night texts, the long hugs that lingered just a second too long, the motel receipts tucked into his glove box. She worshipped him, and he knew it. But Malaya wasn't just some starstruck girl following orders. She was in love, yes, but she was also hungry. For freedom, for money, for revenge against a world that had thrown her away. And Quay promised her all of it. He said they could vanish, start over, build a church in the Caribbean, live off offshore accounts and donations he'd been funneling through his Men of Fire ministry. All of this just to escape Shanice nagging. No more poverty. No more secrets. Just paradise. All they had to do was kill him. For that, they needed a third party. Someone dirty enough to do the heavy lifting and smart enough to stay quiet. That's where Desmond Trill came in, Malaya's foster father and a disgraced ex-cop with a drinking problem and a long history of backroom deals. He ran a junkyard near Murphy's Landing, the kind of place where stolen parts and missing people both went to disappear. Desmond owed favors. He had connections. He also had access to men who'd do anything for a hit of meth and a pocket full of cash. It started with a setup. Desmond paid two of his distant cousins, DeMarcus and Lavelle, both strung out and half living in a stolen RV, to find a homeless man who resembled Quay. After 2 days and a dozen bus shelters, they found him, a mentally ill veteran named Howard Green. 62. Black. Missing teeth. Paranoid. He didn't ask questions when they offered him a warm meal and a place to sleep. They drugged him with fentanyl-laced tea, shot him twice in the head with Shanice's stolen revolver, wrapped his body in a wool blanket Desmond had stolen from her guest room during a fake boiler repair visit months prior. Then they loaded him into a rusted Toyota Camry, planted Quay's ID and wedding band in his pocket, and torched the car off a forgotten service road in Bradford County. But that wasn't the masterstroke. The real genius, the real horror, was what they did after. Desmond had a cousin who worked in tech fraud, the kind of guy who could defake your grandma into singing Drake lyrics. He got hold of the neighbor's Ring camera footage and altered it. Used AI overlays to make it look like Shanice was dragging a body-shaped bundle into her trunk the night Quay disappeared. Spliced timestamps. Added shadows. Cleaned up inconsistencies. By the time the footage reached the police, it looked airtight. No one questioned it. Not the cops. Not the jury. Not even her own lawyer. And while Shanice sat in jail, stripped of her life and dignity, Quay was thousands of miles away, barefoot on a beach in Belize, grinning next to a teenage girl in a cheap white sundress. They were already calling each other husband and wife. They even posted a blurry wedding photo quickly deleted, but not before a tourist snapped it and uploaded it to a travel blog. That's how the truth started to unravel. A blogger looking for palm trees and margaritas stumbled across a groom who looked a lot like a man she'd seen on America's Most Shocking Trials. She tagged the photo. The algorithm did the rest. It landed in a Reddit thread, then a Facebook group, Then the inbox of a retired black female PI from Mississippi who'd never liked the way Shanice's case was handled in the first place. And just like that, the lies began to rot from the inside. Shanice Wooten spent 728 days inside the Limestone Hills Correctional Facility for Women. 2 birthdays, 2 Christmases, 2 years of gray jumpsuits and clanging metal doors, of cold breakfasts, strip searches, and sleep that never came. She stopped talking. She stopped eating. She stopped believing. Her mind became a blur of clocks with no hands and prayers with no answers. Her friends stopped writing. Her nursing license was revoked. Her apartment was repossessed. And then, her mother, her rock, her only lifeline, died of a stroke just 3 months into Shanice's sentence. The guards didn't even let her attend the funeral. They handed her a manila envelope with a photo of the headstone inside. That was it. Just a picture. She thought it was a curse. Some cosmic punishment for marrying the wrong man. For staying too long. For not fighting harder. The system had taken everything. Her freedom. Her future. Her name. And she had nothing left to live for. Then came the wedding photos. It started like any other suffocating afternoon. The day room smelled like bleach and microwave noodles. The TV buzzed in the background while a few inmates played cards. One of them, Latania, a loudmouth with cornrows and a sixth sense for drama, was flipping channels when something on the screen made her sit straight up. A smiling man in a white linen shirt was stepping barefoot onto a beach. Behind him, waves kissed the shore, and calypso music played over a news anchor's voice. Former small-town pastor marries young bride in exclusive St. Lucia ceremony. Latania didn't blink. She stood up, walked closer to the screen, squinted. Then she screamed. That man wasn't just some pastor. That was Quay, Jaquavian Quay Strickland, the same man the state of Alabama had declared dead. The same man whose supposed murder had sent Shanice to prison for the rest of her life. Latania sprinted to Shanice's cell, nearly tripping over her slippers. Banged on the bars. Yo, Shanice. Turn on Channel 6. It's him. That's your dead-ass husband on a beach with some girl in a bikini dress. Shanice thought she was hallucinating. She told her to shut up, go away. She didn't want hope. It was too dangerous, too sharp. But the others dragged her out of her bunk and forced her to look. Forced her to see what everyone else was already whispering about. There he was, smiling, alive, tan, marrying a teenager on national television. And not just any teenager. Malaya Nix Carter. The same girl he used to mentor back at their church. The one Shanice had let into her home. The one who'd called her ma'am. It exploded from there. The clip went viral. Reddit sleuths got involved. TikTok true crime channels stitched it into confessionals and called it a scandal of biblical proportions. News stations back home scrambled to figure out how a supposedly dead pastor had pulled off an international wedding under his real name. Pressure mounted. And finally, a team of civil rights lawyers from Atlanta, black, fierce, and sick of seeing black women tossed aside by a system designed to break them, stepped in. What they found was worse than a mistake. It was premeditated destruction. They pulled the case files apart, line by line. The surveillance footage? AI manipulated. The timestamps didn't match up. Shadows glitched in the corners. Even Shanice's outfit didn't align with what she wore that day, confirmed by photos and receipts. The body? Never positively ID'd with DNA. Just dental records and an ID card that could have come from anywhere. And the gun? Stolen months before the murder ever happened. Reported in a vague boiler repair visit by none other than Desmond Trill, the disgraced ex-cop and foster parent to Malaya. Financial records tied everything together like a noose. Off-the-books ministry donations siphoned into offshore accounts. Fake invoices. A hidden GoFundMe for grieving widower Quay that was cashed out in Belize. And that was just the start. The lawyers had a saying, a setup always leaves crumbs. And Quay? Quay had left a damn bakery. Now the system that devoured Shanice was choking on its own lies. But could it undo the damage? Could it give back time? Thanks to Latania's tip and a team of civil rights lawyers who refused to look away, the walls that had caged Shanice Wooten began to crack. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing ever does when you're fighting a system built to bury people like her. But they started digging through transcripts, receipts, forensic reports, deep-faked footage, and what they unearthed was so staggering, so evil, it felt biblical. The lies weren't just sloppy. They were surgical. And the truth? It was louder than any preacher's sermon. Federal agents tracked Jaquavian Quay Strickland to Soufriere, a sleepy fishing town on the coast of St. Lucia. He was living in a pastel beach house under the alias Reverend Elijah Gray, preaching fire and brimstone to sunburnt tourists while sipping rum and cashing out donations from a fake online ministry. But his offshore trail wasn't clean. Greed always leaves fingerprints. When the feds came knocking, Quay tried to disappear again, passport in one hand, Malaya in the other, but it was too late. He was cuffed and dragged back to the U.S. like the coward he always was. Cameras rolled as he was escorted off the plane in shackles. Shanice, watching from her lawyer's office in Montgomery, didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "I told y'all." Her release made national headlines. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Activists held vigils. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Free Shanice turned into hashtag Believe Black Women. But while the world celebrated, Shanice stood in the center of the storm, free but not whole. Her nursing license? Revoked. Her career? In ruins. Her mind? Shaken, cracked, and stitched together by sheer force of will. She didn't walk out of prison. She rose from it. Then came the trial, the second one. This time, the courtroom wasn't filled with assumptions. It was filled with receipts, emails, bank logs, testimonies. Malaya Nix Carter took the stand, not as a co-defendant, but under full immunity. The girl who once called Shanice ma'am now looked her in the eye from across the courtroom, shaking, young, and heavy with guilt. Her voice cracked as she told the jury everything. How Quay had preyed on her since she was 15. How he used Bible verses twisted into threats. How he convinced her that Shanice was a witch, a literal witch, sent to curse their future, block their blessings, poison their dreams. He said God told him I was chosen, she said, and that Shanice was a Jezebel spirit trying to destroy his anointing. The courtroom was dead silent. Then came the surveillance experts, the tech analysts, the forensic pathologists. One by one, they testified that the original trial was a sham, that the evidence had been planted, twisted, manipulated to feed a narrative so absurd it belonged in fiction. But fiction had sent a woman to prison for life. Fiction had destroyed her name. And Desmond Trill? The crooked ex-cop who played handyman and puppet master? He sat stone-faced as the charges were read. Conspiracy to commit murder, evidence tampering, accessory after the fact. When the gavel dropped, he was sentenced to 40 years. No parole, no redemption arc, no second chapter. The public's outrage hit a fever pitch. Talk shows called it the trial of the decade. Civil rights advocates held rallies outside courthouses. Black women across the country saw themselves in Shanice, their ambition demonized, their trauma dismissed, their silence mistaken for guilt. When the final gavel fell, and the flashbulbs dimmed, and the headlines started to fade, what was left wasn't justice. It was ruin. Quay was sentenced to life without parole, the same punishment his wife had once received for a murder he staged. He didn't flinch as the verdict was read. No tears, no apology, just that same smug, sanctified stare he used to wear from the pulpit, like the world still owed him something, like he still believed God was on his side. The courtroom emptied, the crowd dispersed, and Quay was led away in chains, the devil's grin finally wiped from his face. But what happened next was stranger than anything the trial had uncovered. Because Malaya Nix Carter, the teenager-turned-preacher's wife, the star witness whose testimony cracked the case wide open, vanished. Gone. A grainy security cam still at Luis Muñoz Marine Airport in San Juan, Puerto Rico. One-way ticket. No luggage. Wearing sunglasses and a hoodie. Some say she changed her name. Others say she never made it to Puerto Rico at all. That Desmond Trill had friends who still owed him favors. That her silence had a price. As for Shanice, she walked out of that prison a ghost in her own life. The media begged for her story. Producers offered six figures. Book deals, podcasts, Lifetime movie scripts. But Shanice only spoke once. A single, tear-filled interview on a public access station in Birmingham. No makeup, no spin, just raw pain. She didn't offer explanations. Didn't scream for revenge. She just whispered, "I believed he loved me." And then she was gone. No phone records. No credit cards. She stopped existing in the system that once swallowed her whole. Rumors bloomed like weeds. Some said she was writing a memoir from a beach town in Oaxaca. Others believed she'd joined a cloistered convent in the hills of central Mexico, her voice silenced behind brick walls and whispered prayers. One woman claimed to have seen her in a produce market in Tulum, headscarf, sandals, rosary around her neck, but couldn't be sure. Another swore she spotted her boarding a ferry to Isla Mujeres. But like shadows at dusk, none of it ever stuck. Shanice Wooten became legend. A cautionary tale. A ghost story mothers whispered to daughters. Shanice would never be the same. Because innocence doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't restore the years stolen, or the mother buried, or the trust that burned to ash in a Camry's trunk. It only proves what we already feared. That sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones holding the match. And now I have to ask you, do you think Shanice should have seen the red flags earlier? And what would you do if your partner faked their death to frame you for murder? Let us know in the comments below. If this story shook you to your core, like and subscribe. Where every week, we peel back the curtain on love turned lethal and the lies that leave bodies in their wake.